Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock on Thursday, October 23rd. This is a special meeting of the Caldwell Urban Renewal Agency, and we will ask our secretary to call the roll, please.
Commissioner Doty?
Here.
Commissioner Warwick? She's here. Commissioner Brooks? Commissioner Porter?
Here.
Commissioner Cole?
Here.
Commissioner Allgood?
Here.
Commissioner Moore?
Here. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Doug Waterman will be speaking first. Doug, good evening.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. So tonight you have two items on your agenda. Only one of them is an action item, and I think it makes sense to sort of present them together. They're functionally the same in many ways. For your action item, what you have before you tonight is a request that you adopt the feasibility study that you're going to get presented to you and adopt the plan that's going to be presented to you and forward those on to the City Council for consideration for adoption by the City of Caldwell for the new Central Urban Renewal Area. So in your packet, you have the plan document. My plan in terms of the outline of how I want to present is I want to go through the plan just in brief outline form, and then I'll turn it over to the feasibility study team. And then I will come back and talk about the project list and answer any questions you have and let you take your action. So in your packet, you have the first item is the proposed urban renewal plan, the Caldwell Urban Renewal Plan for the Caldwell Central Urban Renewal Project area. As you all know, because you deal with urban renewal constantly, there are two enabling statutes in Title 50, Chapters 20 and 29, and they contain the requirements for urban renewal plans and revenue allocation areas. And so the plan document does two things. One, it sets forth the actual plan and what you intend to do in an urban renewal project, and it also makes sure that you're complying with those statutory requirements. I won't go through each section of the plan. I know you've had it and had a chance to review and that you're familiar with plans generally, but the general flow is that the plan document in section 100 introduces the plan, talks about the background, how the law and the act works, and describes the project area. Section 200 talks about the scope of the development, what the agency would propose to do in the plan area. Section 300 talks about the plan objectives, how you might coordinate with private developers to incentivize growth, reimbursement agreements, zoning incentives, cooperation with other public bodies, etc. Section 400 is dealing with property that the agency might acquire in the plan area to rehabilitate and then resell and dispose of through that manner. Section 500 talks about methods of financing the project, which include things like bonding, tax increment financing, grants, things like that. Section 600 talks about actions that are required by the city. 700 is talking about how to enforce the plan. 800 is the duration of the plan. This is a 20-year plan, which is the limit on plan length and sort of the standard. 900 talks about ending the project of the plan and terminating the plan. 1000 talks about amending the plan. 1000 or 1100 severability, and 1200 is the annual report. Woven through the plan document are references to the meat and potatoes of the plan, which are the feasibility study, which talks about the anticipated growth and the revenue that's anticipated to come from that growth, and the project list, which talks about what the agency would do during the course of the plan to make improvements in the project area and try to incentivize growth. So that's the general outline of the plan. Those are the general things it covers. And again, now I wanted to turn things over to talk about what's feasible, what you can reasonably anticipate for growth. And after that presentation, I'll come back and talk about what the agency might do with the funds from that growth. So at this point, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Urban Renewal, and thank you, Chair, for allowing us to do this, and thank you for the special meeting to talk about this. First of all, I want to thank URA to allow us to do this. I grew up in Caldwell my whole life, have a lot of friends in this area, a lot of businesses that I know, and I thought I knew everything about Caldwell. But getting really deep into this, getting to meet some of the people face to face. Of course, I have friends that moved out, but family's still there. I have family that owns businesses, friends that own businesses. But it was really good to kind of hear, kind of on a personal level, what's going on here and what they're seeing. And my, the ability to be kind of where you guys are at, and see kind of the growth around this area, but not this area. It's really nice to see that we're finally taking care of friends. People have been here a long time. So again, it's been an honor to be part of this and excited about the change. With that being said, we'll just kind of run through our kind of a study a little bit. I'll talk about kind of what's at the beginning of this, and then I'll hand it over to Michael to talk about the numbers. But for the bigger part, we'll kind of dig into this, and we'll use the slideshow kind of to talk about kind of where we're at here. So to start out with, as far as our content, table of content, we'll start out, kind of skim through the executive summary, and the executive summary really talks about kind of what we found here, and kind of what, the possibilities of this area and how we see the benefit this. And as we go through this, we'll talk about kind of the stakeholders we met with as part of this study and all the information we gathered. And some of the things we've heard from some of you on this committee is being very transparent. So we made a great effort to include all our notes of who we met with, what days we met with them, and that way you guys have a full understanding that we try to kind of comb through and get everybody as much involved in this process as possible. Not only at the city level, but also at those residents and business owners we were able to connect with. So that's really what that's about. An overview of this project as for us, as we listened to stakeholders and residents and business owners, we developed a priority list. And this would allow you guys to kind of understand what we've heard and what we felt the residents and the business owners of this area felt was most important to them. And really to my surprise, and probably not so much a surprise, is that a lot of them had a lot of things in common. And the larger part is really safety. Safety is the biggest thing. And with safety, sidewalks, lighting, those sort of things comes along with everything else. And when developers are looking for areas to develop, they look for those things as well, and also site improvements. So as you go through this priority list, you'll really see what I've talked about really take place here. And as you guys know, working with developers, these are also the kind of things they're looking to help with in order for them to get their projects to pencil out. And so we developed this, and as you hear Michael, his numbers are associated to this as well. So we talked about the immediate needs, and then later you kind of see the wants, right? And so that's how we developed this. And I think this would be helpful for you guys kind of prioritize as well of what's important. And I think when developers see this, and that's really what we kept in mind, is when a developer sees this, they see those opportunities, and then you guys were basically on the same page. I also want to kind of really reinforce that we've been working with Roger Brooks on this as well. And we state this in here that we met with him weekly. We had a regular weekly meeting with him. And when he was in town, we met with him in person, or when they were in our Salt Lake City office, we met with them there as well. So we were really in line with what he was doing along with what we heard, and he heard similar things. So that's really what our priority list is about there. After Michael is done speaking and we kind of get through the numbers, we'll go back and we'll talk about kind of next steps with you guys and how we envision that. But again, we'll get through that as we get through Michael. The other thing that we have in here is really all the notes that we have from our community outreach and how that process went along, and some of the notes we took from that. So you'll see how we gather all that information we got here. We'll also see graphs and charts pulled from some of the city documents to kind of correlate with what we found here along with national stuff. You'll also see some graphics that you'll be seeing later in some of Roger Brooks' stuff. So that way you guys understand that we were all on the same page and we coordinated very well with what we're providing for you today. So with that being said, this is really a draft. So at the end of this presentation, we're hoping to get some feedback from you guys to really fine tune this before we present this to City Council. So with that being said, instead of kind of going through item by item, we'll let Michael talk, and he has a great presentation to give to you guys, kind of a generalized outline of what he put together, because there is a lot of information in there that I think is going to be very helpful for you guys to make some decisions. Okay? So with that being said, I'll hand that over to Michael. When he's done, I'll get back up here and we'll talk about kind of next steps. Okay? Thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. I want to thank the, chairperson and members of the URA board. This is, I'm going to echo the same thing that Adam said. This is exciting for me. I've, been in the public finance business for 21 years, and City of Caldwell projects, urban renewals, the things you guys have accomplished, right? When I look at this city and think about when I was a kid growing up here and coming out to the rodeo, it's been pretty astonishing, right? So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of be a part of this, this study. So as Adam kind of introduced me, I'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into kind of our role here. So I work for Zion's Public Finance, Inc., right? We're a public finance group here in Idaho. We focus on public infrastructure, public finance, like how do you get things done, what are the rules, the constructs, and things that we need to think about, right, if we're going to make a decision, right, that's going to put the, urban renewal in a position to be able to execute, right, on these plans and drive some, redevelopment growth in here. So with that, and I know you guys know this, but it's as much for the public, right, to kind of talk through kind of our process, right, and how we kind of think about these things. But one, right, and we've talked earlier that we've first got to look at, like, well, where are we trying to drive growth, right? What is it that we're trying to do first, and what does that area look like? And as Adam kind of already talked about, that's kind of what they did, right? They went in, we defined this area, right, and said, this is an area that we want to be able to drive growth, and we want to be able to try to get some revenue, increment revenue, so that we can reinvest, in this area. So that's step one. Step two, right, on this is kind of what we're here to talk about, right, is it feasible, right? We want to accomplish these list of priority projects. Can we generate, right, enough revenue for the reinvestment necessary to accomplish those projects? And from there, we adopt a plan, right? That if we say, hey, it's feasible, we can accomplish these things, we think we've got revenue there, we've got incentives, we've got people lined up that want to, build in this area, then we can establish and kind of adopt a plan. And as you guys know, who've had multiple plans already that you guys have worked through, then the work from there is how do you implement and how do you monitor, right? And make sure that that's a successful project. And that's kind of the lens that we, look at this through. From a methodology perspective, right, when we're looking at revenue, we have to kind of dive into what's there, right? And every area is a little different. In this particular case, we've got, kind of more what I will call the traditional area, right, where it's kind of an area of town that, yes, has some development, has some infrastructure, but it's not where we want it to be, right? We want to start, investing in that area and bringing it up to some of the surrounding areas that we see in the city. And so that development that's already there is valuable, right, to the urban renewal, to be able to kind of capture that and also drive some additional project development where it wants to. So we go through the boundary definition, parcel analysis, what's there, what's taxable, what's valuable, make that base year establishment, and we'll talk about that. Go through the increment projections in terms of modeling and what revenues they think we can get from the tax rates that are available to you, and we'll talk about that, and what tax rates are applicable. As you guys know, that continues to change all the time. So it's something that we want to kind of dive into. And then what's that kind of that revenue allocation and use. So quickly, I want to just, for the room, talk about what is urban renewal and what is base value. What are all these things that we're talking about? And, again, the Urban Renewal Agency draws out a map, and once it draws, I'm going to say a box, right, around the area that it wants to identify as the area that meets the definition of either blighted or redevelopment or reinvestment, it freezes that base, and that's important for our taxpayers, right, because they still get the benefit of that. So everything that's happened prior, right, everything that they've paid for, invested in, through city taxes, that continues to benefit, those taxpayers. And so we carve out this area, and in this example, it's 10 million that becomes, the base value. But the total area is still worth $100 million and still gets, the benefit of city taxes, county taxes, and any other taxes in that taxing district. From there, once that area has been identified, then we identify, the tax rates that are going to be applicable, and we set the base. And then that base becomes the foundation for increment from there, right? So that, anything that grows now within that red box, right, that area becomes the valuation. And now any of that tax rate that goes against that valuation is, of course, what becomes the increment value on this. And that's kind of what's demonstrated here. So the outside the urban renewal area can still grow, can still get tax revenue as the city has always collected it. Inside the area, if there was, $20 million of valuation growth, well, you subtract out that $10 million base, that continues to stay with the existing taxpayers. You've got $20 million of increment, you apply any tax rates, as you guys know, and that drives the revenue. Right? So that becomes the base of how we start to work through, projections on this. On the right-hand side of the table, this is the taxing districts within this area. These are the ones that that citizens are paying taxes to, which includes an ambulance district, the school district, the county, a highway district, the city, of course, College of Western Idaho, and a mosquito abatement district. But over the years, right, a lot of those taxing districts have been removed, exempted from, urban renewal. And so that includes, most recently, the ambulance district. That was the one that was passed this last year that removes ambulance districts from this, and they have to opt in. So you can go to them, they can opt in, but they have to opt in that they want to be a part of the, the urban renewal. Caldwell School District, those were removed in 2008, a long time ago. Canyon County, still part of it. Highway districts are exempted. So really you've got Canyon County, City of Caldwell, College of Western Idaho, and the Mosquito Abatement District, right? Those are the 4 taxing district tax rates that apply to any urban renewal tax increment that is established by this urban renewal agency. When you look at the left, you can kind of see that most of that revenue is going to be driven by the city, about 68%, right, from a tax rate percentage perspective. 29% from the county, and then you have some, a little bit from, the abatement district and College of Western Idaho. So really, your partner is Canyon County, right? In this from, thinking about tax rates and tax policies and what's going to drive, future revenue to the increment. From there, from the establishment of the base, then it's diving into, well, what are those projects that we're thinking about, and what is land use, right? What can we think about internally inside that boundary that can drive additional increment if we put the investment, the infrastructure that's in place? And so this table really kind of looks at these different areas that have been identified through the process that was talked about by Adam on project priority areas, whether it was, additional housing, grocery store, trying to get some more commercial space where it makes some sense inside that. And so we look at that, we say, okay, well, if we were to do this, what do we think, the build out rate's going to be? What do we think, the absorption rate, meaning, houses actually being bought, taken in, being built. And some of that will again be refined once we have more of a definitive building plan. But if we kind of take, again, an average and we say, okay, well, we think there's about 400 homes that are going to get built here, and we have we can build approximately 40 a year, right? And kind of average that out. Grocery was a plan to be around 2030 or 2031 fiscal year, and then we've kind of got some commercial space identified. So this is outside the base, right? Remember we talked about that there's a base here that we've already overlaid, this valuation, and so there's valuation there. So this increment is coming from just new development that's being driven by the urban renewal, which, by the second year, we're estimating could be around about 12 million, all the way up to $173 million of just new valuation that's getting generated as a result of these investments that we're talking about. Here broadens that picture now and takes the new development growth that we just talked about, brings back in the base, right? And now we kind of apply an overall growth rate, right, that we think that we can achieve. And here we kind of looked at that and we said, okay, look, we're going to be a little bit conservative, and here's why. When you look at kind of the mix of this area, there's a lot of housing. We know that housing values have gone up significantly over the last, decade. We also know that from an affordability perspective, that puts us on the high end of affordability, even in, Caldwell and some of these, areas. That's going to be a little bit of a drag, right, on, getting, homes built, depending, again, on what kind of homes are built, what markets we're kind of, targeting. And you can look at even the recent story that was in the Idaho Business Review. I think it was just yesterday or the day before that talked about the growth that happened in Ada County, but some stagnation, right? A little bit of decrease in Canyon County from a growth perspective. So we know that there's some pressures, right, in terms of a slowdown. But again, this is a 20-year picture we're talking about, right? So lots of things are going to happen. And even if you looked at the last decade, right, of valuations, a lot happened, right? The last 20 years, a lot happened. 2008 happened, right? Everybody remembers that. Valuations went down, and nobody ever thought valuations would go down, right? We just kind of believed that valuations would go up forever. So a 3% growth model comes from looking at kind of that 20-year history, what some of the growth potentials are, and say, okay, that is likely to be an achievable, right, average growth rate over the next, 20 years, given kind of the base we're at, and start with that as kind of a conservative estimate. When we look at that growth, with what I talked about of the new investment that we think we're going to make, as well as that base value growth, will generate about $21.7 million in increment revenue on the low side. If we get a little more aggressive with that and we say, things maybe pick up more than we think, or we get another time period where, maybe home prices come down for a few years, but then we have rapid growth again, right? And so on an average basis, we get back up to a higher growth rate. If that shifts over to 5%, right, so that extra 2% of growth over that average 20-year period, we get about another $10 million, right? So we're put us at kind of $31 million. So we're kind of building around a range, right? That says we really think that 21 is achievable. We think potentially if growth does really kind of exceed our expectations, that we can probably get to 31 million or more, depending on how that development growth goes. The other thing we got to talk about is, well, what does that mean for taxing districts? Because there's diversion of revenue. That's how this works. And so, again, we kind of laid the foundation that we have, the base value that stays with existing taxing districts. And this table just breaks down, again, kind of a year by year, based on that 3% growth, what revenues are going to get generated by Canyon County, City of Caldwell, College of Western Idaho, and the Mosquito Abatement District each year, right? And those are revenues that they're not capturing, right? Those are revenues that the URA is capturing. It's going back into, the reinvestment, piece of this. So you can see that, again, most of that is going to come from the City of Caldwell. And again, as we talked, about 68%, with the other 29% or so coming from Canyon County on that. And then here is, and we'll work this into our final report. We got this just a couple days ago, but these are some costs around those project priorities, right? So we talked about the revenue, right? We think we've got a range, a comfortable range between 21 and 31 million on ability to kind of generate revenue off of this base. From Priority 1 projects that were identified through the process that Adam's team went through, we have about 10.9 million, right? So we can comfortably cover, the Priority 1 projects that have been identified in that project. Even if there's some cost escalation and some other things, right, that exceeds expectations, we can, accomplish those Priority 1 projects that have been identified. Now, a bigger chunk is these tier 2 priorities, right, which is 31 million. And again, going back to our revenue picture of 21 to 31 million, We may not be able to get all the second-tier projects done. Again, depends on how things perform and other things, and that's why we kind of have this priority system in place is what are the key things that we need to get done within the urban renewal to drive the growth that we want to grow, right? That's priority one. Priority two, if this performs better, right, than we think it's going to perform, then let's start ticking off these additional projects and providing some additional benefits, right, to the citizens from this urban renewal area. And then there's a small group on priority 3 of about 4.3. Right? So priority 2 being kind of the biggest bulk of the expenses. Priority 1 we definitely know is achievable from the projections that we've put together. So the other thing I want to talk about is, well, how do we utilize those funds, right? I mean, there's really kind of boils down to 3 different ways, and there's different times where different parts of those financing mechanisms make sense. The first 5 years, as we kind of demonstrated with the revenue growth, it's the early stages, right? You're setting the base, you're getting some investment, you're getting some valuation growth, but there's not a lot of what we call TIF revenue, like tax increment finance revenue available to us yet, right? So in those first few years, we either picking off some smaller projects, maybe we're doing some, developer agreements to reimbursements to get some things going. We're paying cash. Maybe there's some other infusions that we're looking for to just get this off the ground, right, and get it going. Now, again, the nice thing about this area that's present that maybe wouldn't be present in some of the other areas, right, where it's a dirt bond, right, is we do have valuation, right? So even absent of, initial investment right away, there is valuation regrowth, right, that can drive, revenue here on this. But by mid-stage, which is really kind of that, we get to that 5-year, past that 5-year mark, typically, right, we've kind of ramped up and we're starting to get to a point where we can think about some of the other financing mechanisms, right, which is bonds or, some other loan or leveraging, right, of the revenues, where we're looking at trying to accelerate some of those future tax collections, if you will, from the URA, and bring those forward and get that investment, done so that it can generate and do the things that we've, want this to do. So just to kind of break that down really quickly, and about 1 to 5, based on the projections that we put together, from a 3% perspective, you're at about $1 million average, $200,000 a year. On the 5% growth, you're about 1.3. By year 6 through 10, right, that next 5-year increment, we're up to 4.1, so average of 800,000, right? So again, we're getting to a point where now we can start leveraging, some of those revenues and do bonding, loans, private placements, some other things that we can think about. 11 to 15, about 7.1, and then we're ramping up to about 9 million within the 16 to 20, the later years of that. So just quickly on the bond financing side, if we look to leverage revenues from there, so here's the things we have to think about, right? So we know that they're going to be backed by, TIF revenues, which is effectively passive income, right? You guys aren't in control of that. The taxing districts are in control of that. Other things are in control of what that revenue is. We already talked that we know that it provides upfront capital, and it's really suitable for kind of those later stage phases. Things to consider, right? If I'm going for, debt financing, I can't leverage dollar to dollar, right? I have to have coverage. I have to have some cushion there because of that passive income nature. So whether I'm going to the markets, I'm going to a bank, I've got to have a security that makes sense to the bank, which is going to be kind of that 1.5 times coverage. And even though you can't make a coverage commitment, because again, you're not in that revenue realm, when you go to the banks, they're going to want to see that at least at the time, right, that you take out that loan, that you can show them that you can get to a 1.5 times. Debt service reserves are also common, right? We have a reserve kind of set aside that has to come out of those proceeds. When you do it, it comes back at the end, but something we have to think about. And, lender appetite, right? How established is it? what's going on, how well is it performed. Those are all things that are considerations when we go to, bond financing on that. Developer agreements, the nice thing about developer agreements is that, they take on some of the risk, right? They come in and they get to build it, and they get to look at what they're producing and figure out, well, do I think I'm going to generate the revenue that I've told them that I'm going to, or how valuable this project's going to be to the urban renewal, and drive, some infrastructure needs, and then get reimbursed back from that, right? From a consideration perspective, we can do some caps and floors, meaning that, we can control that a little bit, and that's a negotiation process. Because the one thing you want to consider is if you're doing that, let's say in the beginning stages, and you have a desire later on to capture some of those revenues for bonding or something else, we don't want to give away the farm, right, on that. We want to make sure that there is some room, some increment growth, so to speak, revenue in those future years that allows us to still do that, while, leveraging those agreements in the beginning stages to get things going. So from a considerations perspective, we've got alignment with community goals, which we talked about, right? The URA plan should align with the city's comprehensive plan and long-term, land use and vision, which I know that's what Adam kind of, went through. What are those public priorities? How do we get there? How do we invest and make that happen? From a financial feasibility perspective, we're going to evaluate, if the project is sufficient to support those projects. We talked about that, right? We know we're going to have sufficient revenue coming in to get to those at least priority 1 projects and probably some of those priority 2 projects as part of this. We look at base value analysis, which means, right, going through and making sure that we're not including tax-exempt properties, right? Anything that can't be utilized as part of that base becomes part of the base value. And kind of, what private investment, do we think will happen, right? And we already talked about some of the developers we've had conversations with. We know that there's interest, in this area in terms of, redevelopment. From a project readiness and impact, we're trying to think of, what are those shovel-ready projects, right? What can we get going, right away? Because remember, I mean, the key, one of the keys to this is getting valuation in the ground so they can grow, right? And if we can do that, then that's going to generate more revenue in the future and for a longer period of time, right, to the URA to be able to accomplish these projects. And then kind of what's those catalytic potentials, right? What are those places that are going to give us biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, right? And really kind of, get those things going. So I will wrap up there. And of course, if there are any questions, happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Thank you, Michael. Questions for Mr. Keith? Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, thanks for coming here tonight. I'm sorry, I just got this today. I was out all day yesterday in a meeting that we were at, and I had not had a chance to digest or go through any of this information, and I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So what past history or examples that you could share with us or can't share with us? Tell us what history you've had on this kind of an urban renewal, residential urban renewal. Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I've had and I think the question, Chris, you're asking me is like just kind of what's my experience with urban renewals, and I've had a wide variety of experience with urban renewals from large urban renewals like this, so Lake City Development Corp. We worked on a lot of stuff with Lake City Development Corp. If you guys know Coeur d'Alene, some of that business projects that they were done, we were actively involved in my career in those. We've done a lot of work for Twin Falls Urban Renewal, both on the revenue side and the lending side. So everybody's heard of Chobani at this point, right? And kind of the Chobani project. That one's a little unique, right, when we think about, feasibility, because it's one issuer, right, that's going there. We worked with City of Burley Urban Renewal. That's another project that we've done a fair amount of work around kind of their industrial park, right, that they've tried to get going and build in revenue. We've done work for CCDC as well over the time and given some advice around CCDC. I even have had some history with, the McCall Urban Renewal Agency and even past history with, Caldwell Urban Renewal when I was at, Piper.
Okay, thank you. I guess this is kind of the first of this kind for Caldwell.
Yeah, on this like size and scope of what you guys are doing, correct. And so this is, but as I kind of said at the top of this, I would consider this the more traditional approach, right, to, urban renewal, right, in fact, we just did something similar with City of Burley and City of Blackbrook where, you've got a downtown core area, right, that has buildings, it has housing, and it has things that are there, right? It's been somewhat developed. But, the intent of this tool was to be able to overlay this and say, hey, look, we don't have the funds here the way we would like to invest in this area and make it grow, make it thrive. And so, this is, I would say, a very traditional approach, right, to urban renewal in terms of, valuation and investment versus some of the other things that we talked about, which is bare ground, bare dirt, putting an urban renewal over it and trying to get infrastructure out there to build something, brand new.
One more question, I think. Catalytic places. I think I kind of understand the definition of what you're saying, but who determines those? How do those get determined? I think I listened to you explain that, but can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and and that's kind of the importance of these priority projects, right? You're looking at those centers, and I know one that kind of already got peeled out of this, but the hotel, right? Example, that you've got a hotel that needs some infrastructure, but it's going to generate a lot of valuation, and kind of ongoing valuation for you. Industrial parks, right? That's that's another one that are really good from a valuation, tend to be a little bit more stable in valuation, and then also when you think about those catalytic potentials, what is going to drive other development? So a good example, not an urban renewal, but a project that's happening in downtown Boise that we're working on is the College of Western Idaho building, right? Much like this building in downtown here, you put investment in a space, like that, it drives other development, right? And so they have an agreement with, Alquist Developments that now housing's going to go around there, right? And other things are going to happen around that catalytic project from property that College of Western Idaho owned. So you're looking at, like, not only can I get value out of that project, but can it provide value right now because other people are going to want to build because we have, provided a good space, a good starting point to do that.
Okay. I guess my last question is this, real quick. Once I go through all of this and I reread it and highlight it and everything, what's our next kind of a process? And maybe someone's going to tell us this and I'm getting ahead of us, but when I have these questions in your presentation here, when can I start going through that with you or Adam or whoever? Tell me what the process is there or what's next.
Yeah, so as Adam kind of outlined at the top of this, that is exactly what we're hoping that you guys will do, is go through this, give us the feedback. This is why this is in draft form. Think about the perspective that you guys are coming from, like what is it we're trying to accomplish, right? Does this accomplish that? We have kind of these revenue growths, but it is based on those priorities that we went through with, the community, right? And so if there are some changes to that or drivers or something else that, we're not seeing or you guys want to see investment, in a different way, this is definitely the time, right, to kind of walk through that and we can make ourselves available however you guys need us to be able to kind of work on that, revamp it, redo it, however you guys see.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Mr. Cole?
Yeah, just a very, very general question.
Yeah.
Based upon your experience with URA projects, What do you see as the positive impacts of this project?
The positive impacts that we've seen with a lot of urban renewals, and I can give several examples across the state, whether we're talking about CCDC or even some of the things that you guys have accomplished, is sometimes we get hyper-focused on just the area itself, right? But that typically tends to be, and I'm going to use this word again, a catalyst, right, for other development, right? Because a couple things ends up happening, like you finally get the infrastructure in place that's been needed for a while, right, for development to happen. And urban renewal helps make that happen, right? So you can, divert tax dollars and invest them where they need to go, whether it's roads, streetscapes, lights, safety, all these things that we talked about that are extremely important to community when we think about where people want to live. And so that gets started, and then what ends up happening is the surrounding neighborhoods is like, oh, that's really nice. A new developer is going to come in, and well, now that we've kind of have this development in place, now I have an idea, right? I've got an idea that we're going to kind of redevelop, this area, and that starts to grow. And I think the Lake City development in Coeur d'Alene was a perfect example of how that continued to spread. I think CCDC has been a really good example of how that continues to spread within the city of Boise, and the investments that continue to happen, and surrounding areas now outside that core that CCDC set up, which you think of the Whitewater Park, things I talked about with CWI, which are going to drive additional, urban renewal and tax increment. So there's a lot of outgoing, dependency on some of those projects that really starts to take effect.
What do you see as potential negative impacts on this?
So potential negatives, sometimes, and we hear about this a lot, right, the gentrification, of certain areas, meaning, right, that if not carefully done, right, you can turn an area that was affordable for one group, right, to live in for a long time, and you go in and you change that area, and it's beautiful, right, but if it doesn't include, right, that same type of housing mix, right, you've displaced, somebody that's in that area. And those have been some of the biggest criticisms, right, over the years of urban renewal in terms of use, is we've got these, diverted tax dollars that's getting invested, but it used to be a place I could live. Right now, I can't afford to live there anymore, and I'm moving out further outside of the city, which is the opposite, right, of what you want to have. And so, I think those things are what to keep in mind, right, as we think about, and I know this is on your guys' mind, housing and housing costs and other things, is how do we still keep that community feel, right, with a good mix of housing and people living in that area.
So would you call those potential negative impacts, could that be term gentrification then?
Correct. Yep. And that's the term that's typically used for, urban renewals, right, is the gentrification, right, of a specific area.
And how does it impact the people on the outside of the district?
That's a good question. I think that just depends. It depends on, how well, those things get tied. But if that catalyst, right, is, more expensive housing, other things, that can filter, right? That can filter out that now this area becomes more desirable, which is great, right? Which is, what you want, but it can also increase the prices of housing and other things. And I'm going to go back to, downtown Boise. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the North End in Boise. And when I was growing up there as a kid, that was nothing, right? You lived there, you bought a house, college kids bought a house. It was, 50 grand. It was inexpensive, right, to live in what we call now the North End. That flip, right? So, and it's not that we put an urban renewal out in the North End, but we did all this investment into, downtown Boise, which is gorgeous. It's walkable. It's wonderful. Now everybody wants to live there, which is great, right? It's driving development, but it's also drove up the prices of homes, right, in that area, and made it very expensive, right? Now, that same little home that used to be owned by a college kid, right, is being owned by somebody that can afford an $800 or $1 million house, right? So that's the outside part of it.
Thank you.
Yes, good questions, thank you.
Mr. Doty?
Yes, thank you. And certainly that's a concern. I also think that anyone within our community deserves a safe environment to live in, good streets, good sidewalks. So I like the priority that you have here first. Gentrification in its worst form would be someone comes in and buys all of the lots there, tears all the houses down and builds multi-million-dollar homes. But I think the way that it's prioritized, again, everyone deserves a nice, well-lit space to live, good sidewalks and good streets. So I think it's well organized. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for those comments, I appreciate that.
Any other comments from Mr. Keith? Questions? David?
Mr. Chairman, I have one more, and
Sure.
it's just kind of a numbers thing, and you said it earlier in your presentation, Michael, 3% growth model over 20 years, and you said that was a conservative number that you based this off of, correct?
Correct.
And then if you add another 2%, that could potentially, in this model, add another 10 million in growth, 10 million in revenue.
Correct.
So as that increment, as that growth rate goes up,
100% no, and I think I appreciate that question because it puts in light the flip side of this, which is the potential, right? If this outperforms, which it very well could, right? And very difficult to project, 20 years out. But when you think about a feasibility study, right, we're saying like, well, what's feasible? What can I get behind in terms of defending what I think, is an achievable, growth rate, which is those 3 to 5%. But, 100%, if you get a major developer or you attract somebody that we haven't even talked to yet, right, that looks at this and says, oh, wow, now that we've kind of done some of this development, I'd really like to put this, in the area that drives early development, early growth, and, more revenue. And to kind of go back to, one of the other things that I think it's misunderstood a lot about urban renewals is, we're losing our tax revenue because an urban renewal is in place. And, that is not really how I look at that. It is, the ability that these things will likely not happen. Yeah, maybe you'll have some growth, but without the ability to invest, as we know, right? Invest in areas that we know that can develop and accomplish the safety and the other things that we're trying to talk about here, then people aren't going to want to live there. They're not going to want to go there. So that's the outside benefit, right, of being able to, utilize these tools. The tools are limited in Idaho, as you guys are aware anyways, to be able to accomplish some of these things.
if you can't answer this next question, and this is my last question, I promise, but I'm just curious. So I know you're aware that Middleton has a URA.
Yep.
And tell me any cause or effect of a moratorium in Middleton, how that may have affected, may not have. Do you know any information about that?
I know about the moratorium. I don't know that I've thought about it from an urban renewal perspective. But certainly if you stifle growth, right? Developers can't, build. There's a moratorium outside of an area because they don't have the revenue. And as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of that has been driven by, the tax caps, right, that have been put on, cities and counties, which is, hey, your taxes can now only grow so much. It doesn't matter how much growth you have, you just can't capture it anymore. And so cities have reacted to that and said, okay, well, the other thing that I can control are my expenses, right? And so if I can't put infrastructure in place, then therefore I'm going to put a moratorium around, building that's been done. So it'll be interesting to see the long-term effect of that. And some of that's driven by the school district's overcrowded, and they just don't have any more room, and it's really trying to drive attention to, like, hey, this very thing that we're talking about here with the urban renewal, we need to make some investment if we want to be able to continue to grow as a city.
Yeah. Okay. I got to ask it. So the amount of backlog building permits that we have in the city of Caldwell, is there any type of effect that has towards this proposed plan, this proposed URA, in diluting any of these numbers, stifling any of these numbers, or
Well, it demonstrates, again, what we talked about in terms of achieving that goal, which is there's a desire, right? There's a desire to build and get things done in Caldwell because Caldwell's been discovered, right? We know that. And even if you kind of look at the report, and you can look at this as well on your own, is you can look at some of those, like who's looking at, moving here and from where, right? Redfin has, an app, again, Redfin, like Zillow, which is, kind of a online, website that has kind of grown as a real estate company that provides, data and different kinds of data. They have a mechanism on their website where they track people that do searches on their website on, that if they do 10 or more in a certain area, right? And Caldwell is one of those, right? So, people are looking, to come, to this area, right? So that's that catalyst, again, that driver, that when we see building permits, when we see people looking to move here, doing searches and home searches, that, yeah, there's a desire, for sure. There may not be a supply, right, but there's a desire. And part of what we're trying to accomplish with this urban renewal is fix some of that supply stuff.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anytime.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for your time tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
All right, isn't Michael great? I mean, all the meetings we had with Michael and Raylene, I think I'm 2 credits away from getting my associates in finance, so this has been great. So I think all the questions you guys asked is stuff we've been addressing throughout our process, particularly that on the topic of gentrification, and it's something we've taken extremely serious. During our process, as we met with planning and zoning and public works and all the departments, particularly even with county, that's something we seriously considered. And even meeting with Roger. And we wanted to make sure that, what we do is more of an improvement versus a reconstruction of North End. And so the things that you'll see in our study, particularly those on the way of design, is really more for enhancement and really taking care of, like I said, our friends there. If you can pull up to the map of kind of our circulation, I want to kind of go back to probably the fun stuff a little bit here. Further down, let's go down, the bigger map there. More. A lot of information, guys. Keep going. More. More. I think there's a few more there. There we go. Up. Okay. So, so what this illustrates is really kind of our land use. And again, this has been kind of a collaboration with us and Roger Books and also planning and zoning. And again, some of these are recommendations. Some of them are already in place and felt we need to leave them that way. But this also kind of speaks to kind of further development as Chicago ties into 2026 in the future. And as we do this and we go through this, we're trying to see how well we can balance the area. Obviously, a lot of things to the east, there's not a whole lot we can do there, as county owns a lot of that. And then a lot of it's already being developed, currently being developed. So we really focus so much on that area. But really more on the residential and those to the west of that and what's going to happen there in the future. So as we develop these land uses and recommendations for those land uses, it's all in consideration from what we heard from the public, particularly those when it comes to semi-trucks, traffic, speed, those sort of things. And so what Michael was elaborating to or talking about as far as on the financial side is really more focused kind of on what do we do there. And again, we're trying to keep it as modest as possible, to kind of keep that same charm that we currently have. And as we went through this study, some of the surprising things is, of course, a lot of people who own the properties in this area really aren't from here, And so, the investments that residents have there aren't really for themselves. Really for the properties, more for themselves, as we're seeing. And some of the challenges that we've heard in multiple meetings, of course, is irrigation is one of the biggest things, and that's a lot of things that are really out of control. But all the other things that you'll see in the priority list is things that we can do to help that out. Some of the folks we met with, of course, is the school district. And that was really our priority, is because that enhances the families there and also the students and the safety of theirs. And how do we take care of those individuals who are really the catalyst of this area? And so you'll see that as you go through the study a little bit more in detail. But this also reflects kind of our circulation of what we felt was important, particularly, Chicago and Fifth Street, and how that ties into downtown and bringing people in. I've been part of several charrettes in the past, going back 20-some years, where at one point they thought Centennial was going to be the gateway into the Caldwell, then back to 10th Street, and back to Centennial, and back to 10th Street. So I think with this recommendation, it could go either way. And so particularly with the school being sold off in the future, hopefully somebody will do something good there. And of course, just again, listening to the public and what their needs are and the struggles that they're going through. So what you see here is really a kind of collaborative of all that information and our recommendations to the city on that land use. But again, I want to thank everybody we worked with at the city. Great input, a lot of passion, not only from the city, but also, of course, the residents that you could imagine. So, but anyways, I kind of wanted to add that to my notes that I almost forgot to say that earlier today. Going back to what I mentioned earlier after Michael's presentation, is we kind of want to talk a little bit about next steps here. And so I'll just kind of go through these titles, and then if you have questions, I'll have Michael kind of elaborate a little bit more on what each one of these are, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with kind of these next steps, but we'll talk about it a little bit here. So I think the next step here is kind of the complete adoption of the urban renewal plan here. And as we mentioned, this is really a draft right now. We have a deadline of next Wednesday to get it finalized and get it ready for city council for final adoption there. And hopefully we can meet with some of you guys to get some of your notes so we can incorporate that into the final draft, and we can certainly set that meeting up. Next would be developing multi-phase financial model. After that would be run sensitive analysis and increments of timing and growth. And then, of course, coordinate with legal and bond counsel for structure, flexibility of the financial tools, develop phase infrastructure, implementation, and cost estimates, establish, and of course, establishing community feedback loop and progress and reporting strategy. So that's kind of how we see kind of the next steps after this gets adopted. So with that being said, any questions?
Thank you, Adam. Mr. Allgood.
Yeah, Adam. A lot of this is based on interest, developer interest in, or I shouldn't say developer as much as investment interest.
Right.
And as you're well aware, a lot of this property is absentee owned, so a property owner from somewhere else owns it. And historically, they don't spend a lot of money upgrading once they own the property. They're just collecting rents kind of thing. In all of the meetings that you've had and things, have you had people come forward and express an interest in investment down there? Has that been part of what you've heard yet, or are they still holding off on that?
No, folks that have attended the meeting never really came out and spoke on behalf of that. We know, just knowing people, who do own properties and them being in the meetings and asking questions that I think is more to see what their next steps are. But we never had anybody from out of state attend, and we reached out to some of them, no response. But I think to your point there and what Michael said earlier and some of the things we've heard from Mike Denberg earlier or in some of our meetings is that I think once they start seeing some of these improvements, I think they're more likely to improve their properties as well. But as far as somebody coming to us directly and say, hey, we like what you're doing here, we want to improve, we've never had anybody really come up to us and talk about that. But, my experience in some of these meetings in the past that I was, on the professional side involved in, developers tend to kind of keep quiet because they don't want some of their ideas to get out. And so I'm not surprised that hasn't happened. I think they'd like to see it from afar and then kind of figure out what they want to do. But I think once these things happen, I think those will change a little bit. And particularly with some of those property owners, I know a few people that just didn't know what to do with their property, and they own it, whether they inherited it, they don't know what to do with it. And now that there's somewhat a plan in place, I think that will give them some direction, whether they want to sell it or keep it, you know, and I've made recommendations to them to keep it, you know, and do something with it. I think it needs to stay here and stay with them instead of giving it away, so, but that's just a personal suggestion, so.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Mr. Moore?
Mr. Chairman, Adam, so can you share anything with us, and I know his name's been brought up several times here tonight, Roger Brooks, any apprehensions to this plan and those visits that you can share, or any attaboys or anything like that that you could let us know, or?
Well, I you know, it's I don't know, it's kind of hard to kind of answer that a little bit. I think it's just that, I think Roger really understands what's happening here. I was skeptical, as well as I enjoy Roger and seen some of the things he's done. I was a little skeptical, particularly with an area like this, but he got it. He understood it, you know, and in our report, you see we'll use the term, you know, O-Town a lot, and that's because it's something we found in kind of some old documents of this, what this area was called. So you'll see that in our study quite a bit. Roger has other suggestions on what kind of breaking out these districts, which I agree with. But for right now, we're going to kind of continue calling it Old Town. But some of the ideas he has, and as you guys know, Roger's very passionate, and that carried through to us as well. And so, but I was really surprised how well in sync we all were, and how understanding he was of the sensitivity of this area. So, yeah, it's been great.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you, thank you. You and I spent a little time down here at the park. We had a
Yeah.
committee there at the library. I can't think of a better person to lead us with this. You know these
Well, thank you.
areas, and you and your company, and I'm looking forward to going through this, and I appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. So, and I want to thank you, Dottie, Commissioner Dottie, for getting that started for us. It really was a spark for this whole progress, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Adam? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And I could just keep that picture up. That's working perfect. Are you the one with the pictures? Great, keep it up. Perfect. Okay, so before we carry on, I wanted to talk about timeline. So tonight, the request is that you adopt the proposed plan and forward it on to the City of Caldwell, City Council, for them to tee up their hearing and send it to P&Z for review. It is true that this is in a form that is called a draft, as is the project list. There's no prohibition in the code on the plan document getting refined as it moves forward. But the substance of the plan that you have before you tonight is final in I think all the material components that would be necessary for it to move on to council, with a recommendation from you that council consider it. To that end, if there are questions, comments, suggestions that come up in the next week or so, in particular next week or so, please communicate those to staff as soon as they occur to you, and we'll work with Archnexus and Zion to get those incorporated in or clarified as the case may be. And to the extent that those comments and suggestions can be front-loaded in the next week, that's certainly preferable to doing it after council's taken up the draft plan. So, at this point, you've heard the condition of the area, what the anticipated growth is based on conservative models. And so that's the meat part of the plan, and now we're moving to the potatoes part of the plan. This is on page 31 of 235 of your packet, if you wanted to follow along. So Rob McDonald has been tremendously helpful and diligent and remarkably quick at putting together a list of the anticipated projects and the anticipated costs. And this works into the urban renewal plan as attachment 4 and is incorporated by reference. And it meets the requirement of the code by laying out, sorry, what's the?
Just wondering if you could put this chart up on the screen so folks can see it.
Okay, yeah, it's page 31 of the packet.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's legible when you have it in front of you as a sheet of paper, a little less so on the screen like that, but that's okay. And so with the timeline of when the feasibility study was completed and when the project list was completed, those two things work together. They're still being interlaced to have the project priorities line up with what's in the feasibility study and vice versa. And so some of these priorities will likely be changed, but the purpose of the project list is, under the code, to set out all the projects the agency anticipates that it may undertake during the 20-year term of the plan with whatever specificity it can at the inception of the plan, the location where those improvements may occur, and the anticipated cost. And so, understandably, that's a difficult task, and the code does not require that we be exact. It requires that we be as specific as we reasonably can be, given the order and given the timeline. And as I said, Rob has done an excellent job of attempting to synthesize from the feasibility study and from the on-the-ground circumstance what kind of projects and improvements are necessary, and has broken them down, generally speaking, by street for road improvements and associated improvements, some traffic safety measures, recreation areas, and then some miscellaneous improvements as well. And so I'll go through them in brief if you have questions about them. Mr. McDonald is here, and while I don't know if he's anticipating being called up to answer questions, I'm sure you can convince him. So the streets that are being targeted by the plan where improvements would occur are 5th Avenue, Chicago Street, Kimball Street, 12th Avenue, Freeport, Galveston, Boise, and Elgin. And depending on the street and the conditions there, in the improvement description, there's a list of the specific things that are needed to get those streets up to where they hopefully will be. There are a few traffic safety measures as well that are not street specific in that same way, centennial traffic signal, pedestrian crossing, and then some calming measures as warranted at locations throughout the area. And then there are projects associated with recreation areas to create some improvements for public use in that way. Plaza on 5th in Denver, some improvements to Lions Park, Greenbelt Pathways, the Canyon Springs Park, and an additional recreation site. There are page by page sort of broken down what those improvements are, whether it's landscaping or paving or sidewalks, and the anticipated costs. And then further on, for some of the more general improvements, there are some depictions as well of what that might look like. But the way this works in conjunction with the feasibility study is, okay, we've got our feasibility study, we know what we anticipate in terms of revenue. These are the improvements we'd like to accomplish in the area, and we can then say, all right, our high priority improvements, it's very feasible and very likely that we can accomplish those during the 20-year period with the increment we can anticipate based on our feasibility study. And then we rank order the improvements for things that are still feasible from a technical sense, but lower priority. Depending on how the market fluctuates, they may not be achieved or not. We rank them down in priority. So we make sure that the important things are accomplished up front and then get to as much as we can. And in the event that there's sufficient revenue to cover all the projects on the list, then the agency has nothing else it can do. That's one of the requirements of the urban renewal law that's new. I say new, not within the last couple of years, but within the last decade or so. that unlike Caldwell's original urban renewal plan that provided with the agency with a lot of latitude to continue doing projects as they came up and occurred, the law now requires that you list out your projects, that's what you do, and when you're done with them, you wrap up the agency. So, are there questions about the specific project list or recommendations about the priority of those? Those are things that can still be changed as we move forward, and I'll do my best to answer or call up Rob.
Mr. Doty?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like some clarification why it would be a high priority on the list that we just saw, but maybe come in phase 2 or phase 3 from the plan. Is the high priority what's taking place on the street itself? So I'll give you an example. Elgin, I believe, in the original presentation showed it as a lower priority or a different phase of the project, but here it says it's high priority. So can we explain what the difference means, why it would be high priority here and a lower priority
You bet.
in the plan?
So, at the end of, by the time these documents all go to council, the objective is that all the priorities are matching. And part of that is the conversation tonight and input from you. If you see things that are high priority that you think should be low or low that should be high, we want your input on that. The feasibility study and the project list came together within the last week or so. And so they're still in the process of being aligned. And from a economic feasibility standpoint, economic development standpoint, there are going to be different priorities that you would come in with, in the sense that certain improvements may spur economic growth, as opposed to the city's public works department looking at priorities based upon maybe the condition of the street or the need there. To know exactly why Elgin was a low priority in the feasibility study, I'd have to call Adam back up. To know exactly why Elgin was a high priority in the project list, I'd ask Rob to come up. The goal is to get those aligned so there's not a mismatch in the final document.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, and I don't know if we need to go through each one tonight, but certainly I think that's something that needs to be addressed so that we know which is the high priority and which is not. So if you're looking at one chart, we don't want confusion that, hey, that's supposed to be a low priority, but then in another chart, we're supposed to be considering it a high priority. So, go ahead. I don't
Yes,
mind.
I'll let Rob speak. I'll just say there's a practical goal of having them match, which is an important objective, and there's also a practical goal of making sure that they're right. And so both of those things are being worked on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Chairman, Commission. I just wanted to point out just one thing briefly. We've been working on this, and it's kind of a living document. The document that you're looking at here, this cost estimate has already been revised considerably, and so the whole section below, the miscellaneous, the total of that entire section is about $5 million, and on this, I know it's quite a bit more than that. So a lot of those unit costs have been adjusted, and then up there, so the top portion, which has all the priorities, and the miscellaneous portion together, the entire thing totals about $52 million on the current version. And some of the priorities have already been adjusted, and so what you're looking at here has already been adjusted just in the last couple days since the packet went out. We have an updated spreadsheet, and we can certainly get that sent out to you immediately, tomorrow probably. So just keep that in mind, that some of the costs and those numbers are still changing.
Sure. Yes, I'd appreciate that because we have a lot of high priority and very little that falls into the other category, but the plan had spread it out. And I think maybe we shouldn't use low priority, just that it's not in phase 1 or phase 2. And so I believe that's what we don't want is confusion, right? Yeah. And once it's finished and once council says how they would like things and which priority, we just want, like Doug said, that all that matches so that there isn't any confusion or argument over what was supposed to be a higher or a lesser priority, might be a better way to say it.
And I will just say, Commission, to that point, the priority will not ultimately control this commission's ability to decide what gets funded. So it is important that they are prioritized appropriately, so that you have a clear vision and so the plan complies with the law and so that the documents match and the public is not confused or led astray by that. But as a general principle, that priority list is something that if somebody comes in and they do an improvement to a street and the project is either done or for whatever reason it's not necessary, you won't be bound to that priority list. per se, so.
Mr. Allgood?
Yeah, Douglas, I'm not sure you're the one to answer this, but hopefully you are.
Okay.
So I'm from an operational point of view, say you have your two top priority things, sidewalks, curb, gutter, whatever. Is the plan that urban renewal would go in and just kick those off right away? Or it would be more like the Fifth in Chicago where we have an investor comes in and says, I'm going to develop this corner, I would like help with this. So is it going to be done piece by piece as people come and bring stuff to us? Or are we going to go out and start building sidewalks and streets?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Allgood, excellent question. Right now, so the agency has funds available to it from other areas in the account. None of those are available to do projects in this area because plans are area specific. So you can't have funds come from one area and do something somewhere else and vice versa. So in the first year, the agency will have no funds to do anything in the project area, then that will slowly change. The agency could obtain funds through a grant. It could obtain funds, theoretically, it could make a request to the city for funds or a loan. I'm not aware of that happening in recent history and have no reason to think that the city would be willing to do that, but theoretically that could happen. And then the other option is to have a developer come and they front the cost. And then instead of having the agency take increment and do the improvement gets done. As the increment comes in, the city pays it back. And so all of the funding options are available through the life of the plan. There's the feasibility study talks about bonding and when that might be possible. And so if there are certain improvements that have not been accomplished and bonding becomes a possibility, then based on the strength of the increment coming in, you could have a bond and the agency could do those improvements. But right out of the gate, the thing that is available to the agency is the same thing, for example, with Mr. Jenke's project, where he will do the improvements. There won't be any outlay from the agency up front, and then he'll be reimbursed for the cost of those public improvements. So that doesn't exactly answer your question because it could be A or B in the front years. It's most likely it's going to be reimbursement agreements unless there's a grant available. So.
Okay, yeah, because in years as we went through with the East Urban Renewal, we put in roads, we put in sidewalks, we did that kind of thing. A lot of that stuff already exists here, but just like you're saying, it took 20 years out there to build enough increment to start doing those large improvements like that. So yeah, especially initially, this would be a piece by piece kind of developing this area as increment compounds.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Mr. Chairman, question for Councilman Waterman. So the amount of stress that's put onto the citizen with an LID, what's the role with the citizen on that? What kind of stress or what kind of a position does that put a citizen down here in? Is that too general of a question, or do I need to?
So yeah, and I think you're intentionally asking about local improvement districts?
Yes.
Yeah, so local improvement districts can be used in conjunction with urban renewal. They're separate and apart from tax increment financing. The thing that I believe is unique about local improvement districts is they are a levy set that's applied against property, like a business improvement district, that doesn't fluctuate with property value. But the local improvement district would be something that the city would have to initiate. It's an authority the city has. The agency can't initiate a local improvement district, and they're typically for an isolated improvement of some sort, and generally speaking, they're not always they're voluntary. So it creates I think typically it's a 10-year annual obligation. They're used most commonly in Caldwell in the context of sidewalk improvements, where you have someone who needs their sidewalk improved, they can't afford it all at once, and so they become part of the LID, they can have their sidewalk improved, and they pay it over the course of the 10 years instead of in a lump. LIDs have been used in the context of urban renewal projects elsewhere as sort of a nuanced method of securing financing to to lend for large improvements, where you have a large project and a lending entity that doesn't necessarily want to lend the money without a security, and so you create an LID to act sort of like a mortgage of sorts against the property. But I would not anticipate anything like that in this area. That's more large industrial type activity. So there's at this point, no specific proposed LID. It is a tool the city has. It could work in conjunction with the agency. It does create an annual financial obligation in excess of the regular property taxes, but I'm not aware of anything in the plan that makes it a necessary component of the future that certain citizens down there would be paying LID fees or assessments.
What circumstance would a city have on a citizen to actively insert their will to the citizen that they need to get into this LID? We need to have this done, versus the citizen saying, why do I do that? I mean, I got this coming, I'm going to be paying into it. Why would I have to do that? I mean, and I don't know if that's a question for you or for Mr. Keys, but
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like we're taking motivation and kind of putting it aside, saying this is going to come and solve all of our problems and cure all of our answers, and but I don't know. And then I look at it as maybe that's putting more stress on other city budgets. It could potentially put more stress on other city budgets.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, are you asking about doing an LID instead of this? Is that what you're talking about? Or I don't quite understand your question.
No, in a comparison. What do I want to enter into one of my own property, an LID, or do I want to sit back and wait for URA to come in,
Okay. So,
or the city to come in and say I need to do an LID, which,
yeah, so Mr. Chair, Commissioner, and I'm going to assume that you're speaking hypothetically. I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not giving you legal advice about your own property, which
Yeah.
I know is not what you're asking.
right? No, I know you're not.
So-
I'm just, need to squirrel away some money here, maybe. I don't know.
I don't recall out of the code on local improvement districts exactly what the tipping point is for the city to oblige citizens to participate. My recollection, albeit somewhat fuzzy, is that you can have an LID that is required if more than half of the people who are in the proposed LID object. I think it requires like a unanimous vote of the council, something like that. I can't recall exactly. But in terms of why a citizen might wait for renewal to come through and do an improvement versus participating in an LID, that's going to be an individual economic question. There could be some incentive to sit and wait, but generally speaking, with the way Caldwell has been structuring its urban renewal districts, they are driven by, you don't get access to the benefit of them unless you come and participate. So in particular, where improvements are being accomplished by reimbursement as opposed to the city, the agency going and doing the improvement, just sitting and waiting, your sidewalk will be in the same condition it was in 20 years from now as it is now. If you propose an improvement of some sort, propose improving your sidewalks, there's an opportunity to be reimbursed for that. But, is there a chance that somebody in the district will have a sidewalk improved despite their non-participation through bonding in year 15? Yeah, it could happen. It could happen, but that's generally not how these are driven at this point. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Do you see any stress that it's going to put on any other city budgets? Is anybody?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, you're talking about an LID or the district here?
The district, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's hard to say exactly, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Moore, what the stresses would be. There's an operating presumption with urban renewal that it works as a but-for factor in improvements. And so, and the other thing that has changed over time is that there are certain districts that are excluded. And I don't recall for like a residential improvement if you'd have something in this category, but for example, for ag land, it used to be that when a piece of ag land lost its ag exemption, its base assessment value stayed down at the ag exempt value. And the legislature said, no, when ag property loses its exemption, the base comes up to its fair market value. And there may be some things like that in the in the project area as well, where even the base will grow during the 20-year period. It won't be locked in entirely either. But you could theoretically have improvements that put some stress on a city budget or a county budget. I wouldn't be the one who could necessarily get into exactly what all the circumstances would look like.
Yeah.
But the objective of it is, and what the feasibility study sort of seeks to demonstrate, is that the consequence of it as a net is improvements and an increase in the taxable value of property, commercial improvements, which generally are service positive. They take less services than they often pay for in terms of police and fire and things like that. And I don't know the total value of the commercial and industrial property that rolled into the tax base when the prior area sunset, but it was significant, and it was a category of development that was, like I said, service positive in the sense that it would, per square foot, generally speaking, put less of a demand on police and fire and things like that than residential. So if you want more specifics, I'm probably tapped out on my ability to articulate those economically, but I know there are people here who can talk about it, so.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Waterman?
Okay. So we'll call that I think I called that potatoes. So we're done with potatoes. So now coming back to the plan as a whole, the item before you tonight is a single action item. We had the presentation on the feasibility study that was a component of this, and a presentation on the plan sort of as a whole. The ask of you tonight is to say, yes, we accept the feasibility study. You find that it complies with the law and that we approve of it, and we approve of the plan as a whole as well, and we want that sent off to the city council to be considered, to be adopted. What the council will do at that point is they'll decide whether they want to move forward or not. They'll set a hearing. They'll send this off to P&Z for review with the comp plan, and there'll be a final hearing on the plan. And like I said, in the interim, the material components of the plan will stay the same. If there are suggestions or comments for staff, please communicate those, and we'll try to incorporate them as soon as we possibly can. All right, unless my last 4 sentences produced a question? Yeah.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah, a question I have on this is the procedural aspect of the resolution. The resolution is adopting a plan, right? That plan, though, is like a living document. It changes. It's just been changed yesterday, I guess. So is there any issue with us passing a resolution, attaching a document that is going to be changed periodically? Do we have to do other resolutions on top of that, or how does that work?
So depending on how much, I don't have Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I don't know exactly how much will change between now and council or thereafter. The objective is as little as possible. Inevitably, little council has input, right? They're the ones adopting the plan, so the plan changes from their first hearing to the final hearing and things like that. So the agency's role in this is the agency has the right to propose a plan to the city council. And if things change material enough, I might bring a final version of this back to you for approval, but the ultimate adoption of it will be at the discretion of the city council. And so that would be more for the sake of memorializing the final
Thank you very
plan.
much. That clarifies
Okay.
that for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Mr.
just have another quick question
Sure.
for Michael, if that would be possible. So on numbers, when this goes to council, so in your projections, we could probably spend every bit of increment we take in and probably have more to do. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, because, and the reason I'm going there is there are times that some council members are like, for instance, like on an area we did recently, can we accomplish this quicker and close our URA area in 18 years instead of 20 years? This is not going to be one of those cases. Is that your estimate?
Correct. No, if it kind of follows even kind of the high projections, and as you kind of already heard, right, when Rob stepped up here to talk about, like, Total cost, if you did everything, right, we're at 50 million. We've projected at that 5% increment, right, that we'd have 31, million in increment. So even if it outperforms, would have to significantly, right, outperform for us to not only accomplish all the projects you have on the list and to do that sooner and be able to close out the URA in, say, 18 years versus 20.
That's what thank you so much, appreciate that.
You bet, Commissioner. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Douglas, do you have anything else to add? No. Okay, very good. We'll ask the commissioners then, what is your, what's your action? What would you like to do?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Doty?
I support the plan, especially going forward to the council. I think that many things, and there's many checks and balances between now and when it could finally be approved. And I believe that we spent the money in the right spot. Thank you to Adam and his team and everyone else that participated. And though we didn't get many people that own the homes in that area, we certainly got people that live there. And I think this program is based off of that information from those living there. So with that, I'll make a motion for Resolution 2025-22 adopting the feasibility study for the proposed central revenue allocation area and recommend of the central revenue allocation area to the City Council.
Okay, we have a motion for approval by Mr. Doty. Do we have a second? Second. A second by Mr. Allgood. Any further comment or questions? Is that for a question?
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I haven't even had a chance to print this off and go through it. So for me to approve something to go forward, I thought we are going to have until the 29th to bundle our questions and get them back to Adam, get them back. So am I missing something here?
We're still able to give our comment and questions right up to the time that it goes before the City Council.
For this to move forward, but as far as adding additional questions, our deadline is the 29th, so we can add those to it. To Doug's point, there'll be very minimal. What we saw and what's going to go in the final report will be very minimal, along with whatever additional comments you guys might have.
Just a comment.
Mr. Doty?
But just in fairness to Commissioner Moore, if there was something significant, right, Mr. Waterman, that would be brought to the attention, or if it were to have to come back to council, correct?
Mr.
Or,
Chair.
excuse me, to the commission.
Mr. Chair and Commission, if there was something that was sufficiently material that the plan that you approved tonight is not the plan anymore, then that means we got to come back. If it's little points of clarification or elucidating some item or answering a question you have, I don't think that is material. But, yep, I would agree with that assessment.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to hold this up, but I'm not ready to support this until I actually read it and
Understand.
kick it around and tear it up a little bit and decide.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dave. Mr. Allgood, did you have a
Oh, no, I
comment or
was
question? Okay, with those comments, would the Secretary call the roll?
Commissioner Doty?
Yes.
Commissioner Allgood?
yes.
Commissioner Warwick?
Yes.
Commissioner Cole?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
No.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of our agenda this evening. I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All right, we are finished. Thank you, everyone.